Hi, welcome to my podcast, Becoming a Cut Flower Grower. I'm your host, Lydia, and I'm here to share my year of growing and selling cut flowers. I'll be giving you the lowdown on everything I'm doing and sharing all the highs and lows, the good times and the inevitable disasters, all in real time. Join me on my cut flower journey, starting right now. Wow, what a week. We are basically having the greatest British summer in April. So it's been lovely and warm all week. Bit of a cold winter start, but today, as I record this, it's Friday the 4th of April, and it has been about as beautiful a day as we would hope for in the UK. Just absolutely glorious, just hot and sunny and amazing. And I've had a busy couple of days since I last spoke to you, but not massively related to the plot, because I have been avoiding planting things out during the day. Certainly I've put some perennials out in the evening and watered them, and we still get quite a decent dew in the mornings here, so everything is kind of moist, but everything is just going crazy in the greenhouse. There are literally seedlings everywhere, so the greenhouse is full. I had to put some extra shelving in. My house is full of stuff. There is just stuff everywhere. And it's all very exciting, but also quite terrifying at the same time, because the volumes just look enormous. And then I'm just thinking, gosh, I hope I've got enough space for all of this, because I can't grow it and then not have anywhere to put it. So lots of nerves this week, as well as excitement and also just incredulity at how fast the year is going. I can't actually believe we're in April already. I am ready for Easter this year. Normally, I'm the sort of person who buys their Easter eggs about 4 days before Easter, because I remember the days when I was growing up, you did buy presents, like Christmas presents or Easter presents, about a week before the event, and you could just go into a shop and buy them, and it was quite normal. In fact, I've done Christmas present shopping on a Christmas Eve in the past, and it has been a really lovely experience, because you're so festive and in the mood at that point to buy presents that it all kind of makes it a really nice experience. And somehow over the last decade, if you don't do everything about 2 months in advance, the shops have run out. In fact, some places they clear the Easter eggs out before Easter, and you can't even get one. They've moved on to the next thing, which is probably something awful, like, I don't know, something autumnal like Halloween or something. They're going to have the product in for that. I dread to think. So I was super organized, and I bought all my Easter eggs and all the little bits that go with them and everything else, and then they're just sat there, and I put them in a room that I don't go into. And of course, my brain knows they're in there. So what's happened? I've eaten 2 already, which is just horrifying, because I don't need to be eating Easter eggs, certainly not before Easter. And it was just a stupid thing to do. And now I'm going to have to go back to the shop and replace them, and then just hope that in the next fortnight until actual Easter, I don't eat those either. And I don't have anywhere else to put them that mice aren't going to have a go, or if I leave them at someone else's house, they're not going to eat them when I leave them. So that's just a bit of a battle between me and the bag of Easter eggs. And we still don't have a door on the shed. So I know everyone's on the edge of their seats about this shed, and can't wait to hear all the updates. It's getting really boring now. I'm bored of it myself. We've done quite a bit more work. We've boarded up the inside. We've done some tweaks and ventilation and bits and pieces, but we still haven't got a door on the front. And I think I've come up with the final idea for what we're going to do, and we just have to get on with it. Very tedious. The main thing that I thought I would share with you today, and this is the reason why it's Friday and the podcast is not up yet, because I went to see my Dahlia mentor this morning, Richard. If you haven't heard me talk about him on a previous episode, he is a prize-winning Dahlia exhibitor. He's based in my nearby town, and I met him through my local horticultural society. And he is a wonderful man who is so generous with his time, and he really wants to pass on everything that he knows. And that's so sweet of him, because I love people who like that. There are some people who just keep everything secret, and don't share information. And then there are people like Richard who are like an open book. He's like, I'll tell you everything there is to know in the most granular detail, in the hope that I will share his passion for dahlias, which I have to say I already do. And I definitely do share his passion for dahlias. I'm so excited, and I feel so much more confident about dealing with them than I did a year ago, which is great. So let me share some of the learnings that I got this morning from Richard with you today. So we did a couple of things. We're waking up the dahlias. So they've been in storage all over the winter. They got lifted at the end of the autumn last year, and they get dried off and stored in trays, completely dry. I didn't use any shavings or any compost or newspaper or anything like that. They just went away completely bone dry, and they stayed in a cool, dark place all winter. So it's time to get them out. So I had got most of mine out, and Richard had got most of his out as well. But it was interesting for me to make sure that I'd done mine the way that he had done his. So one of the things that we're doing is waking them up, basically, and either potting them on into individual pots, which is something you do if you had maybe, I don't know, half a dozen or a dozen. But if you've got loads, and Richard's got hundreds, I think, then you would kind of wake them up in trays. So he uses like fruit crates, which have got like gaps between the plastic. And I've tended to use solid trays because he just happens to have lots of these fruit trays and I don't. And he lines his with plastic. So he recycles compost bags, and he cuts rectangles of plastic out and punches some drainage holes in the bottom of the plastic, and then lines these trays with the plastic so that when he waters them, they will drain and they won't go soggy. Whereas because I haven't done that, I have to be very careful when I moisten mine that I don't put too much water on, because there's nowhere for the water to go in my case. And when he gets them out of storage, he checks them over really carefully. So he's looking for gall. And if you're not sure what this is, and I wasn't, it's like little knobbly white growths around the crown. So that's the top bit of it. And if you've chopped them down from last year, you'll probably have about an inch of stem. And it's where that stem joins the main tuber. That's where the crown is. And so you're looking for gall on there. And if you find it, you need to pinch it out. And he also checks all the tubers individually and makes sure that none have gone soft and squashy, because that basically means that they have rotted and they're no good. And those rotten squidgy bits that feel like a tangerine or something, they need to be removed, carefully removed, so you don't damage the rest of the tubers. And he's looking to find shoots, or before they've become shoots, they're known as eyes, which is basically where the new stems are going to grow out of the crown. Then he gets a pair of scissors and he trims all the roots off the tubers. So by now, all the roots have just dried up and they're all like straggly and they just look like dried bits of string. Most of them got cut off when the tubers were put to bed in the autumn, but any straggly bits that have dried up over the course of the winter, they need to be trimmed off. So you're left with these beautiful clump of nice firm tubers around the base of the crown. Now, Richard sieves all his compost. I mean, he really spoils his dahlias. He takes it to a whole new level. I must confess, I don't normally sieve my compost. But he likes to sieve his so that there are absolutely no lumps or bumps or bits of rubbish in there, because sometimes in the bags of compost you just get all sorts of horrible little bits, like bits of bark and Sometimes, God forbid, you even find plastic, which is just awful. And so into the trays, he'll put a mixture of his sieved compost and some perlite. And he puts in a handful of slow release fertilizer granules like Miracle Grow. Nothing like chicken pellets or Vitex Q4, but just he uses like fertilizer granules at this point. And then he sits the tubers with the old stem facing upwards on top of the compost. He fills the compost around the tuber, and then he kind of grabs the stem and shakes it a bit so the compost has a chance to settle around all of the tubers. And he's very careful not to cover the crown. This is really, really important. So not just don't cover the stem, but leave the uppermost part of the crown, because this is where the dahlia is going to start shooting from. And then he labels it very carefully. He's fastidious about this, and he always drums this into me: label everything. And then he waters them very lightly. Ideally, he said you'd use warm water. I don't know that mine are going to get warm water. And he said also to water the crown rather than the tubers, which is actually quite tricky because obviously the tubers are attached to the crown, but that's what he's suggesting. And then he puts them on bottom heat. So he's got these fantastic mats that he buys, which I'm going to look up, which are basically heat mats. And he sits the trays on the heat mat, turns the heat mat on, and it gets up to like a fixed temperature, and you don't have to mess about with the temperature or anything. It is, once you turn it on, that's it. And then he puts a cover over them, like a piece of cardboard or a Hessian sack, or basically any kind of cover. Old jumpers or anything would do, to block out the light. So this is something that I hadn't done with mine. I thought that the tubers at this point, when you're waking them up, needed to be in the light to stimulate them to shoot. But what Richard is saying is that you want to replicate life underground for the tubers, because that is where the tubers are expecting to be at this point in time. They're not expecting on the 1st of April to be in bright light. So what you're doing, the heat and the dark is going to replicate a warming soil. And that is what is going to encourage the dahlia tubers to start sprouting. So I thought that was a really interesting lesson for me. So I need to go home and put covers on top of all of mine because they're just in the sunshine, and that's what I thought you had to do. So I thought that was really interesting. And he said only remove the covers when they're actually shooting. So definitely a lesson learned there. So the second thing that Richard taught me today was how to take cuttings. So this is cuttings from shoots that are already well established. Now, depending on what stage your tubers are at, will dictate whether you can do this or not. So Richard had a dahlia today that had, I think, 2 or 3 shoots on it that were about, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 inches tall, maybe even 9 inches tall. None of my tubers are at that stage at all, but because he was able to show how you would take the cuttings. Now, taking cuttings has always frightened me to death, and I've had mixed results doing it in the past. And I've watched loads and loads of internet tutorials about how to do this, and people make it sound like the easiest thing in the world. And I must be doing something terribly, terribly wrong, because I have yet to get anything to shoot properly, unless it's some things that just shoot in a glass of water and then, root in a glass of water, and you can see the roots coming out, and it's like, oh, wonderful, I've done it. But anything cutting wise, rooting into soil, I have not had any luck. But we've done it today, and he's shown me, and it seems incredibly straightforward. So I'm going to have another go at that when I get home. And basically, by taking cuttings from the new shoots that have come out of the tubers, you just increase the number of plants that you've got. Now, you have to be careful that you don't cut every single shoot off the tuber, because it's going to slow it down, and it will then have to put all that energy into doing more shoots. So that tuber may flower a little bit later than if you hadn't cut the shoots off. So he puts his cuttings into a perlite compost mix, quite nice and loose. He used a really, really sharp knife. I think he had an Opinel knife. which he cleaned first, and he cut above the node to remove the shoot from the tuber to start with. And then when we were actually prepping the cuttings, he's cutting below a node. He said it's very important to check the stem, so lift it up to your eyes after you've cut it below the node. He said you don't want a hollow center. Apparently, if it has a hollow center in that particular cutting, it won't make a proper tuber. I'll take his word for that. So we checked all of the cuttings, and then we dipped the base of them in a little glass of water and then straight into hormone rooting powder. And then we put the cuttings around the edge of a pot, and we sort of gently firmed the soil up around them, but again, very, very gently. Then we cut all the leaves in half, labelled it, obviously. And then we put the pot with the cuttings into a large tray filled with water on the ground so that they could take up water from the bottom. So Richard's very much believing that you should water from the bottom so that you don't disturb what you've just done. And obviously we don't want the water flowing down and like rinsing the hormone rooting powder off. So he's then going to take those cuttings and put them somewhere warm and frost-free. And hopefully next time I see him, there'll be some evidence of roots coming out the bottom. Now, the final thing that he showed me, well, we had a really, really packed morning, was sowing dahlia seeds. Now, he'd collected seeds from a few of his flowers last year, and he'd kept them cool and dry in a dark place. And so he showed me how he sows them, and he does a tray. So he fills a tray with compost and perlite mixed together, again sieved, very finely sieved compost, and he pre-soaked the trays again so that they soaked up moisture from the bottom rather than watering the seeds or the compost from the top, so it doesn't disturb anything. And it all looked really beautiful because he uses a little piece of wood that he tamps the compost down, so you get this perfectly flat, beautiful, level top. And then he used a pair of tweezers to position each seed very carefully. And then he lightly covered the seed with, again, very finely sieved compost, labelled it, and then he didn't water again. He put that tray of seed on the heat mat, and he's going to leave them now to germinate. Now, he said when he plants these guys out, these little seedlings, the normal dahlia tuber spacings don't apply, which I think for me, he's told me 2 feet apart. He said for the little tiny ones that you grow from seeds, you can plant them out 8 inches apart, and they should flower in year 1, which I was absolutely amazed about, because I know we've got all these annuals and everything flowering in year 1, and I kind of just expect that, but I never thought a dahlia would flower from seed, because the plants are just absolutely enormous and the seeds are tiny. But he said they will flower in year 1, and what we really want is the flowers in order to get more seeds. So we're not after a huge tuber, that is not the goal. We just want to get the seedlings to turn into lovely plants, to flower, and then I guess I could use them for cut flowers, but you could also harvest the seed from them. So it was a really action-packed and very, very busy morning, and I take copious notes while I'm talking to him, and some photos as well. So I'll put the photos on my @HenHillCutFlowers Instagram if you want to have a look at that. We also went through the list of dahlias that I'd ordered from Halls of Heddon, because I've actually had the confirmation. Oh yes, that's it. I've had the confirmation email from them to say that they received and processed my order. So thank God to the Royal Mail, because they delivered my order form and I have got my order in, which is great. So we went through those, and also he'd ordered me some rooted cuttings from Peter Nyson. So I've got 3 dahlias called Just Married, which is the most gorgeous pinky yellowy fim, and also 3 Nene Kazi. I can't remember what colour they are. I've got a feeling they're like an orangey colour, again another fim. So he handed those over for me, and also he helped me divide Maggie C. And Maggie C, she's epic, this dahlia. She came all the way on the house sitting in February with me, and she sprouted quite early, and I was a little bit worried about it. And she loved the underfloor heating, put on all this growth. So then I had to take her off the underfloor heating, slow her down a bit. Anyway, Richard helped me split her from one huge plant into 3 separate tubers. And this was also a fascinating process to watch, because I've always been quite protective about the tubers, and Richard cut Maggie C up with a hacksaw, which was like the most brutal thing I've ever seen. And I've never done it before, and like that. And I thought, oh my God, she's going to be destroyed, but she wasn't. So we've got 3 separate plants from one original Maggie C. And as I say, Richard showed me how to do it. He used a hacksaw, so he worked out where to cut based on where the shoots were coming up. And they're obvious on Maggie C because they're a few inches tall now. She's really going for it. So we cut them, and then he dusted them with a yellow sulfur powder to kind of seal the exposed tubers. So when you cut a tuber in half, it's basically exactly like a potato. So when you cut a raw potato, excuse me. So it had that same kind of white inside and looked like, very raw flesh, I suppose. So we dusted them in this powder, and then we've potted them up and labelled them. We haven't watered them. He said, just wait a while to water. Don't rush that. Just leave them for a while. And they're going to have to come inside with me and stay in a warm environment, which there's no end to the warmth at the moment. So that was my morning with Richard. Loads done. And I left with a car full of cuttings and dahlia tubers, and just so inspired and so grateful for his help. So I told him about the podcast, and I said, I'm sure, in fact, I know that my listeners would love to hear from you. So hopefully he's going to come on the podcast in the future. And if you have a question you'd like to ask him, then do drop me a DM on the Instagram, and I will put the question to Richard and he can answer it for you directly. I'm quite sure he won't mind doing that. He's so passionate about sharing his knowledge with everybody, and he wants as many people as possible to be growing and enjoying dahlias, because they are just the most gorgeous flower and not as terrifying as you might think, although pretty labor intensive. So that is everything. It's been busy. I hope you have a wonderful weekend wherever you are and whatever you're doing. I'm kind of praying for rain, actually, but I know we're not going to have any for the next 10 days. So it's just such a great time for germinating. So if you're growing anything from seed, or you're thinking about it, and the weather conditions are favorable wherever you are, then get stuck in. And I will be back next week with some more updates for you. And until then, all the very best, and have a wonderful weekend.